Hi, everyone. My name is John Dominguez. I'm a clinical psychologist with Meridian Psychiatric Partners, and I'm going to show my screen for you guys right now, and we'll get started with the program. Today, I will be talking about ways to access school-based supports for your child. There are a lot of children in this area that benefit from specific supports and accommodations to uh, access their academics in a more meaningful way. We're going to talk about how to do that. Before I get into that, um, I want to tell you a little bit about Meridian Psychiatric Partners. Um, we have a large outpatient adult psychiatry and psychotherapy program. We deliver family and couples counseling. Um, we do have a fantastic women's health program, inside of which is an amazing postpartum health program. Um, as far as our child and adolescent division, which is relatively new, we also provide outpatient child and adolescent, psychiatry and psychotherapy. We are planning on offering some groups here in the near future. We're working out the logistics with that. Um, and like what I'll be doing today, excuse me, like what I'll be doing today, we also want to outreach to parents in a unique way that we hope will be supportive to you guys. So today is one of the parent presentations that we offer. So that's what today is, and I'll jump right in. Um, I guess the best way to start is with the legal regulations. Section 504 regulation requires that a school district must provide a free and appropriate public education to each qualified person with a disability who in the school district's jurisdiction, regardless of the nature or severity of the person's disability. Now, this is all legal speak, and if you don't speak that language, it just means that if a child has a disability, that does not limit them at all or preclude them at all from accessing a free and public education. So what that means is, and this section doesn't spell out exactly how to do it, it just tells them what to do, that the districts are responsible for providing education, um, free and appropriate education for students with a wide range of disabilities. So let's go into what that looks like and then ultimately how to access that. The first thing I want to say is without without any major programming um, changes or major meetings and things that have to happen, what's happening more and more is there are more universal classroom accommodations that happen, not just targeting students with disabilities, but really for everyone. It's more like a preventative, it's more like a tier one intervention where every student is afforded this. So these aren't these aren't like major intense accommodations, but they are accommodations that in most cases most schools and classrooms will honor. Just things like posting the daily schedule, post having assignments posted so kids can access them, having a consistent daily structure, changing modes of instruction, um, having breaking up the day with passing periods and breaks, and there are more. These are kind of just off the top of my head, but just know that more and more teachers are wanting to provide these tier one accommodations just to make learning easier for all students, not just kids with disabilities. But now I want to move into what about students that do have, some sort of disabilities that interferes with their ways to access education. And let's start with students that whose disabilities are less severe. Um, you can have students that actually can do well in the general education setting and don't need any kind of resource or outplacement, program, but still benefit from specific accommodations to address academic or therapeutic needs, as you can see. Some of the most common ones are, students with ADHD. Maybe they need accommodations like um, having extra time on tests, or, being able to have um, quiet fidgets, at their desk. Another example is maybe a student dealing with depression and anxiety. A 504 plan can help support that student who otherwise still does well in a general education setting. Could provide them with things like a social work pass, ways that they can talk to a school therapist or counselor if they're feeling emotionally activated. So a 504 plan is an official document that outlines, where the student's disabilities are interfering with their access to education. And then it leads to the kind of supports that a student could benefit from. And then the 504 plan sort of puts those in place. And then it's the school district responsibility in the form of the teachers and the other service providers to implement that plan with fidelity and consistency. So that's a 504 plan. And for kids who are more severe in terms of their disability, um, the most common way to support students with disabilities is with an individual education program, an IEP. And a lot of you guys probably have heard of this, but I want to break down what this is, and show you exactly what it does for students. So the IEP document is a legal document and designed to support students who require supports and services outside of the general education setting. This could be a resource class, receiving related services in the general education setting or outside the general education setting. It could serve kids who need to be outplaced to a more restrictive or supportive school program. So um, this is because it's a legal document. Once it's put in place, the school district is accountable to making sure that it's implemented, as I said, with fidelity and consistency. And it's a really big deal if it's not. So schools know that, with these individual education programs, they need to be aware of them. They need to um, follow through with them, and they need to talk to their students um, about them and the accommodations they're getting, and whether or not they're feeling helpful to the kid, to the student. So um, there are several domains of eligibility for an IEP. So for a student to qualify for an IEP, and I'll talk later about how how it can be determined that they qualify for an IEP, but I want to talk about the domains of eligibility for an IEP. A student um, can meet eligibility for an IEP from a number of domains. It could be academic achievement. They could be struggling with academic achievement based on some disability, and that could be the basis for an IEP. Their functional performance, just navigating the school day, getting to school on time, making it to class. Um, just meeting basic student expectations. That functional performance can be impaired. There might be a disability that impacts a student's communication skills. How whether it's receptive language, expressive language, pragmatic language skills. These are areas that disabilities can show up and impact education as well. Cognitive and intellectual functioning. That's another area where a student could be deficient and meet eligibility for an IEP. Health, there could be medical issues that impact access to education. Motor functioning skills, vision and hearing. Um, and the big one that I work with is social emotional functioning. There could be um, an emotional disorder, depression, anxiety that interferes with a student's ability to access education through, maybe it impacts their distractibility, maybe it impacts their ability to get to school, maybe they might be school avoidant, and there may be a number of social emotional interferences in how kids are able to manage their school day based on a disability. So these are the domains of the eligibility for an IEP. There are actually 13 eligibility categories that align with these domains of functioning. Autism and other health impairment (OHI) are other ones. So um, uh, based on these domains of eligibility, there are categories assigned that align with eligibility. And if a student, because of these behavioral domains, if a student meets any one of these eligibility categories, they could qualify for an IEP. So here's what an IEP is. Here are the components of what an IEP is. like like a lot of things, we want to start with strength. It's and an individual education program, an IEP definitely starts with what the student's strengths are. We always want to build off what those are. It could be creativity, it could be intelligence, it could be sociability, it could be um, they're just kind and they're articulate, and artistic and athletic. It could be a number of things. So we always want to be building off strengths when we're supporting students, when we're supporting children in any environment, but certainly in the school district. Um, and then there's a big component about parent concerns. Parents are an active part of the IEP process. They're part of the IEP team. They're probably the most important part of the IEP team. So, what the parent concerns are, um, it drives a lot. It drives a bit of the IEP. Parents have a unique perspective on their child and what kind of support they need to do better in school, and what things they might require in terms of support that they're not getting. So the parent concerns piece of this is very important, and every IEP team knows that. Every school district knows that and honors that. In my experience, um, goals, IEP goals are a major component of the IEP, and these are exactly what it sounds based on what the students' presenting issues are, based on their areas where the domains in which they qualified for their IEP. There will be goals set up in that area, so that monitoring. Um, we're monitoring these areas and hoping that we're seeing the kind of improvement that will um, that we're hoping for. If this were a student who meets the eligibility criteria for an IEP because of an emotional disorder and they're struggling with depression and anxiety, this is a common one that I get. A goal area might be, you know, um, student will be able to identify um, and effective coping strategies to address depressive and anxiety symptoms when they arise, something like that, where the goals speak specifically to the eligibility criteria and how the student is functioning. So the student functioning is something that paves the way for the goals. It informs the goals. So um, I mean, I could give a lot of other examples in a lot of different domains, but I think you get this. And the IEP goal writing process is actually pretty. It's actually pretty it's pretty intense. As somebody who has written a lot of IEP goals, there's a lot written and there's a lot expected in good IEP goal writing, because we want the goals to be meaningful, and that we want them to lead to a meaningful change in the student's school functioning. But the goals also have to be attainable. They can't be so lofty that the student is set up for failure and not being able to meet them. So sometimes that balance is a tricky one to find, and then they also need to be pretty specific in terms of what we're measuring. So the goal writing process in itself is pretty involved. But just know that the people who write these goals, they're aware of this. So the goals how they're written usually are done really, really, really well to support the child, given what their presenting problems are. Another major IEP component are the accommodations. So there is a wide range of uh, accommodations and supports that a student can have in the classroom and in the school setting. And you can imagine what you know you can um, you can Google classroom accommodations, and there'll be a huge list come up. But these are there can be accommodations around homework, modifying tests, extended time on tests, um, sensory breaks, movement breaks, social work passes, access to counselor, um, support with academic organization, checking in and out with their assignment notebook, and there could be a number of uh, academic accommodations as well, in terms of if a student has anxiety, performing in front of others, like they can have the option of presenting their projects just to the teacher one-on-one, not in front of the entire class. Um, or record it at home and give it to the teacher. There's such a wide range of accommodations. I can't even cover it you know in a reasonable amount of time. But just know that, based on what your child is struggling with and where they get stuck, there can be a number of accommodations that can support them in a way that makes it easier to access education. And the IEP team has their work cut out for them, because the problem with a student having too many accommodations or too many involved accommodations is that they're really hard to implement. A teacher, it's not reasonable or feasible for a teacher to be expected to provide, you know, the kind of accommodations for multiple students in their class where there just isn't enough time. There isn't enough time and resources and materials for them to do that. So again, there's a balance in what accommodations are going to be beneficial, but also can be easily implementable in the classroom. Because if a student needs accommodations that aren't easy to implement in the classroom, now we're talking about a student. If you look at the bottom of the slide, when we talk about educational placement, then we talk about a different educational placement. But in the case that a student can be served in the general education setting, maybe in with resource or anything else, and these accommodations, that's the goal. And if we can't provide accommodations that are effective enough in that setting, because it's too much, it's too involved, then it speaks to this might not be the best placement. But I'll say more about that when I get to the bottom of the slide. um, Related services is another major component. These can be direct, or these can be consultative. uh, when a student receives social work services, therapy services, 20-30 minutes a week, that's what's known as a direct service. Speech pathology support, OT support, um, occupational therapy. That's what OT is. You guys probably know that. These are some common direct services that are provided to kids in the school setting. So, based on the kids' needs, related services will be put in place and implemented in the school setting for the student. Um, a functional behavior analysis and related behavior intervention plan. This is another major component of the IAP, because it takes the child's target behavior. And what a target behavior is the behavior that um, the behavior that compelled people around this student to seek an IEP. What were we seeing from this kid that suggested that they need a lot more support to be functional in the school day? Okay, so when we write this functional behavior analysis, we're talking about a specific behavior or a specific skill set area that has been problematic for the student. And then what a behavioral functional behavior analysis is it takes the target behavior and it breaks it down into, what does it specifically look like? What are some antecedents, things that typically come before the target behavior that may contribute to the target behavior? What typically happens after? What are the consequences of these behaviors? Is something reinforcing these behaviors inadvertently or not? Um, and behind the functional behavior analysis idea is this assumption that every behavior is trying to send a message. So a child is communicating something through their behavior, and it's through the functional behavior analysis that we try to understand what that is. So when we understand the antecedents and consequences of the target behavior, then we make hypotheses about what it is that this target behavior is communicating, um, and then and then we respond to that accordingly. If we believe that this is the child's way of avoiding non-preferred academic work, then then we have that conversation and we design a program for the student that makes it easier for them to engage in the work that they're trying to avoid, for example. But that's what a functional behavior analysis is. It analyzes the target behavior and leads to a hypothesis about what the child is trying to say with this, um, and then it sets the table for us to um, tweak their program a little bit to have them be able to communicate this in a different way, not through behaviors but through words and and tweaking their program accordingly, which is where the behavior intervention plan comes in. Based on the functional behavior analysis, there'll be a behavior plan which outlines some student accommodations for the classroom. It reviews components of the functional behavior analysis and outlines what supports are necessary for the student to maximize their engagement in instruction. And again, it'll include a lot of accommodations that I talked about before, but also like a plan. It includes like a crisis plan, like if a child's behavior um, has risen to the point where it poses a threat to themselves or others. There's a crisis plan attached to the behavior intervention plan. Uh, that's another component, but the behavior intervention plan for any student just outlines the kind of supports that they're going to receive and the when and the how in the school setting. And it follows from the functional behavior analysis, that better analysis of the behavior. Now we know what they need in terms of school-based support, and it's outlined in the behavior intervention plan. Another major component, some people will say this is the most important part of the IEP plan because it extends past the high school years, is the post-secondary transition plan. Within an IEP, when a student is required to have a post-secondary transition plan in their IEP um, at age 14 and a half. So whatever IEP calendar year um, the student turns 14 and a half, a post-secondary transition plan must be developed. And what a post-secondary transition plan is, it's a plan to start thinking about life after high school, whether goals are more vocational or educational. Um, the student engages in the process with the IEP team about what are some possible what are some possible aspirations and endeavors that the student has after high school that align with their strengths and interests. And um, what the post-secondary transition plan does is it takes kind of step by step. Excuse me. Excuse me. I have a bit of a cold. uh, it takes it takes the long-term goal in mind in terms of things that the kid right now is interested in, and make sure that during their school years that they're receiving everything they need in terms of coursework and other opportunities that are available to them to explore and get experience towards these post-secondary plan ideas. So this is why a lot of people think this is the most important part of the post-secondary transition plan, because there are, especially for students that are lower functioning, and for whom um, college is not a reasonable um, college isn't a reasonable goal, and maybe even their ability to vie for competitive full-time employment, maybe for students who are too low functioning for even that to be reasonable. It's going to be very important to have a good post-secondary transition plan for how are we going to meet this student's needs after high school. Like, how can we set them up for success after high school? And for students who fall into this category, where I say they're lower functioning enough where full-time employment and college aren't in the cards. um, Transition programming is also legally uh, available to students and through their 21st year of age. So if students qualify for additional transition support, the school district has to provide transition program for students even after their high school coursework is over, all the way up through their 21st year of life. So that's an important piece of information for parents who have students that kind of are in this category. So that's what a that's a little bit about a post-secondary transition plan. Another component is extended school year. That's the IEP way of saying summer school. Some students qualify for summer programming, programming, because the skills that they're learning, therapeutic and academic, maybe there might be too much of a regression in skill acquisition over the course of the summer if they're not in programming. So through an IEP, a student can be um, eligible for summer ESY programming. Now, the students usually don't like that, but parents often feel a lot better if their student is still getting some kind of school-based programming. And when we talk about kids with an IEP who are receiving all these services and accommodations, you still want some of those to be available to them in the summer. You don't want them going a whole 3 months without them. So sometimes the ESY programming is a really good fit. And I mentioned this before. Another major component of the IEP is the educational placement. Now, there's a term called least restrictive environment, LRE, and this is sort of the goal of any IEP team. When an IEP team looks at educational placement, it's going to be informed by the services and the accommodations and the goals that the functional behavior analysis, all these components inform the educational placement discussion. But what the LRE requirement states is that the school district is required to provide the least restrictive environment in which the IEP can be implemented, that these accommodations and services and goals can be implemented. The students deserve the least restrictive environment, but these environments have to be, but in order to be in a least restrictive environment, it has to be able to meet the expectations of the IEP. So that's the balance, and that's the charge of the IEP team. What is the least restricted environment in which this IEP can be implemented with fidelity? So these are the these are the things that an IEP team, which the parents are a part of, along with specific school members, these are the decisions that you'll be making with your IEP team about all these components on your IEP. So I know I spent a lot of time on IEPs, but this is the most popular way that kids get services in school is through an IEP. And I will say that first slide when I talked about free and public education, this does only apply to public education. I probably should have mentioned that earlier, but to me, this is not as big of an issue. I think it used to be. Um, so like maybe you have students that are in private school or plan to have kids that are in private school. Just know that private schools um, they're not subject to this FAPE rule. They don't have to, they don't have to provide services with students with disabilities. They can say, "Sorry, you can't come to school here. We don't have enough support for you." They can say that. So in private school, excuse me. So private schools aren't on the hook for this stuff the same way that public school is. But what I've come to understand in the past several years, and it's still trending in this direction, that's even private schools. I mean, private schools are aware that their resources are limited, so no, they can't serve every type of student. But even tuition based public schools, they want to be private school. These tuition based private schools, they want to be a school that can accommodate the needs of a diverse group of kids. So they have their own process by which they have to determine you know how much accommodation is too much because we don't have the resources. But the spirit of even in private schools is to be able to help a wide range of students. They don't want to feel like they can only take the kids who are you know cookie cutter, come in, sit at their desk, yes ma'am, no ma'am, for 40 minutes, and 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 do everything that they're supposed to do. Like, so I think even if you're dealing with school staff in a private school, just having this information, even though they're not subject to it legally, I think that you can engage them in a conversation about how to what things could be put in place to better support my child in your private school setting. So the last slide that I'm going to talk about is now we're talking about the specifics of how do you as a parent access the support. And the sugar and vinegar bullet point at the top is just, I think you kind of know what that means. I've worked in the therapeutic day school setting for over 20 years, so I've been on the other side of this for most of, for most of my career. But I know that I've experienced a lot of parents that come in with their pistols blazing in terms of coming to a school district and say, my child should be getting this and this and this. And I thought you said this was going to happen and you didn't make it happen. And we need to do this and they deserve this. And I respect the parents, position in terms of like, I want my child to be supported in school in the way that makes sense, in the way that maybe we even talked about. But I still think that it's kind of a better approach to reach out and say, I know my child is a unique learner. I know there's a lot of kids that have unique that are unique learners in your school, and I know it's a lot to make appropriate accommodations for every child. But I do want to still have a conversation about ways in which my child could be helped in a qualitatively different way. Can we sit down and have that conversation? That's usually a better conversation starter when it comes to how to get the school to support your child in a different way. And the current climate, um, I don't know if this is if this is a good or bad thing, and I don't really know how it's gonna like end. But like what I've seen starting with COVID is that um, you know, I mean, COVID just really impacted this whole, you know, child school functioning in a really significant way. So for, the better part of a year and a half, students were at home, you know, doing school, lying on their bed in their pajamas, on their laptop and maybe paying attention to the virtual instruction, but probably had three or four other tabs up on their laptop playing games or watching YouTube videos or something. I mean, I live this stuff. So, and then coming back to in-person learning, uh, I just I just saw the distress tolerance, the general distress tolerance of everyone just lowered. And coming back to in-person learning, students were just willing to tolerate less and open to doing less and felt more entitled to not have to do what they were being asked to do by a teacher. So so I've seen a million examples of this. It really did deplete sort of the stress tolerance, not only of students, but parents. So what the current climate is now, and any school district will tell you this, there's a much larger percentage of students that that are struggling in a lot of different ways, and struggling in ways that would require, some school-based support, to get them on the right direction, or at least help them access construction instruction in a more meaningful way. So the fact that school districts are faced with such a large an increase in the number of students that need some support, it's putting the school district in a tough spot because there's just so many ways that they need to accommodate so many children. So I guess sort of what's happening, because I know it because I'm on this end of it, and like for example, I'm a consultant for one of our local school districts, and I come in and I train the social work staff on on how to serve kids with social emotional needs in the general education setting. So I think from the district's perspective that hired me as a consultant, rather than have kids who needed a lot of support be outplaced to, like a therapeutic day school, which costs them a lot of tuition money, because there's so many students that have that have these needs, they want to build up their in-house, therapeutic supports so that the kids can be served, in their home school. So that's kind of the idea. So that's happening more and more and more. School districts are working hard to train their staff better and differently, so that even as the kids' needs arise, the the staff's ability to meet these needs, also rises alongside them. So that is kind of the current climate. So specifically, if you were in a position where you felt like your child needed more support in school, um, each school has a district special education office and coordinators. It's not hard to reach out to a school and find out, who a good representative to talk to about special education and getting these types of accommodations. Um, and like I said, rather than come in with pistols blazing, just express your concerns clearly and concisely and ask about options to provide extra support. And you'll have a meeting to talk about that. Um, Sometimes there are ways you can have access to the teacher, and there can be a conversation about just informal teacher accommodations that might be helpful for your child. These things happen a lot. Like sometimes teachers don't know that kids are really anxious about answering questions in front of the class. So like, a lot of times teachers can talk to parents and then make an informal accommodation of like, okay, I won't call on your child in class unless I tell them ahead of time that I'm going to do that, and they say that's okay. Um, Again, there are a million little accommodations like that that can be made, if you have some kind of contact with a teacher. So that's another way you can have a little bit of an impact there. I mentioned what a 504 plan. You can, with these special education coordinators, you can request a meeting to consider a 504 plan. And if based on what everyone's saying, there's a need to develop a 504 plan, then great. It'll be developed and specific accommodations will be attached, and then we'll monitor that to see if that is in fact increasing the child's ability to access education in a more meaningful way. In terms of an IEP is a more formal process. And again, these are for students that are whose disabilities are a little more severe, and they're usually not able to be met in the general education setting without some resource support or perhaps outplacement, but at least resource support. Um, in order to be considered for an IEP, there needs to be what's called an initial case study to determine eligibility for special education services and an IEP. So I've done a lot of initial case studies, and um, based on how the students are performing, we look at the domains of IEP eligibility, and we fill out what's called a domain sheet. And in all the areas that there's evidence that a student is struggling in every one of those domains, um, we'll will indicate, what type of testing we want to do in each of these domains if there's a suspicion that this is a domain that could lead to IEP eligibility. In most cases, when we do these domain reviews, half of the domains aren't relevant because the student doesn't show deficits in these areas. But in most cases, yeah, but in the other in the other three or four, there might be evidence that this is an area where they struggle. So that domain review um, outlines the testing questions, um, that the the evaluation strategies that we're going to do within each domain in order to determine potential eligibility for special education. So if your child does not have an IEP and you feel like they need one, the language you want to use is how can I set up a meeting to talk about an initial case study for my child to see if they qualify for an IEP? And then obviously school districts know what that means. And they'll probably want to have a longer conversation with you about, why are you thinking that? Your child looks like, they're doing well here from our perspective. So if there's, based on how your child is doing at school, they may have some questions or a different different perspectives that you guys can just sort of share. But that's the language you want to use if you want your child to be tested for an IEP. It's called that initial case study. And if you're really getting if you're going through all these steps like I'm asking, you're still not feeling like the school district is responsive or open or um, is has an interest in serving your child better, then you do have the recourse of there are educational advocates out there that are that do this for a living. They work with parents and school districts to get the schools to really pony up and provide the services that they need. And special education lawyer is another is another option that you have um, to help engage in the process with the school district, to make the school district think differently about ways they could and should support your child. Um, and when educational advocates and special education lawyers get involved, at least I mean, I'm kind of biased in this. It does change the vibe of the conversation. It does feel more adversarial because once it gets to this point, there's usually been a history of, the school wasn't responsive to the parents' initial requests, and then that usually is a setup for things being kind of rocky initially, uh, but these are things you have at your disposal. Hiring an educational advocate or a special education lawyer if you feel like there's more your child should be getting and the school district's just not responding. So I know this was kind of quick and went through a lot really fast. So what I'm going to leave on the screen here for the next couple seconds is, again, just a reminder, I'm John Dominguez from Meridian Psychiatric Partners, but at the bottom of this slide, please feel free to take down my work email. Uh, I have no problem making myself available to any follow up questions based on things that you saw or heard in this video. You have specific questions about your specific child and how to access supports for your specific child. I'd be happy to respond and be helpful in any way that I can. Uh, so sorry if this felt kind of quick, but thank you guys for joining and listening. And again, like I said, please feel free to reach out to me if you have specific follow-up questions, and I promise I will respond to your email. Thank you guys very much.